Good morning, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome to this week's weekly energy boost. I am here this lovely, I don't remember what day of the week it is, with Karen Adler again, who is not only an unbelievably gifted therapist, but also a beautiful soul and Kabbalah student, and somebody that I have been privileged to know for a lot of years. I don't want to count because then I feel old.
You do.
But one of the beautiful fruits of that, the connection that we have, is this romance with what Karen does and what Kabbalah teaches. And the beautiful, I'm going to use again the word fruits, because the fruits that emerge from that are so, right? They say food is medicine. This is medicine. These conversations, these collaborations, and it just felt, in building up to these 2 episodes, I was just so looking forward to releasing these ideas into the world and having more people understand that the body, mind, spirit connection is all the work that there is. That if we endeavor to produce anything, whether it's a business or a career or a family or anything, that is simply the stage on which the internal work sets us up, right? That's where it takes place, but it is not the goal. And you've heard that so many times if you've been listening for a while. We always talk about how the goal is not outside of you, that your purpose is not outside of you, it's within you. And what happens outside of you is simply to facilitate the awakening and the transformation within. But we get so busy and distracted with what's happening around us. And this week, we're taking both the energy of the month of Capricorn, which again is one of the heavier months of the year. We are combining it with this week's energy. And when we talk about this week's energy, we usually look at the wisdom of the Zohar, which is broken up into weekly segments. And this week's segment talks about life and death. Meaning not here's what happens when the soul leaves and here's what happens to the body. It is actually talked about in this week's section of Zohar. But more importantly, the idea that death is simply a stage in the journey of the soul. And it's such a quick stage. For the actual person who leaves their body, it is the quickest part of the soul's journey. We who are left behind on earth, for us, it's the longest part of the journey. And for that reason, I wanted to take this opportunity to have Karen share. Karen was on Weekly Energy Boost in 2020. I want to say November, actually. It was your birthday. It was in August 2020. I think it was actually recorded on your birthday, if I remember right.
I think so.
And of course, 2020 was a year of the word of 2020, unprecedented loss. I don't think anybody was left untouched by what happened, the pandemic, and it seemed like urgent. We had to talk about it. Now, obviously, there's as much, if not more, or let's say in the last 3 years, we've probably been more marked by death than I would say prior to 2020, if that's a product of getting older or simply the death and destruction that's taking place in the world. But I felt like we couldn't pass through this week without bringing it to the forefront of everyone's awareness. And for that reason, we're going to talk about our relationship with grief and how to understand it, use it, heal it. And maybe that's the first question is, are we even capable of moving past grief?
Well, it's interesting. One of the things I believe I said last time is that not all grief is traumatic, but all trauma has grief in it. And so these have been very traumatic times. And so we almost can't, we can separate them out, but we have to understand that grief is such a huge part of what we're dealing with along with the trauma. because we're losing loved ones. We lost jobs. People are losing homes. A lot of divorces happened within the pandemic when people were kind of forced in that pressure cooker together. So you have to deal with the trauma and how complicated the grief is around the trauma. And that's what makes it difficult, because people are trying to like move on before they're ready to move on. And so, it's our need to keep going and protect, it's the nature of this vessel, of these five senses, to protect this thing. So what it's in the wild, there's this mechanism that comes into place, fight, flight, freeze, and has a great purpose. It preserves you. But when you're in a chronic state,
can you give us that metaphor again? I remember it when you were about the deer in the headlights.
Yeah. So if you take an animal in the wild, there's actually a video of it. I think it might even be on my website, but it's an impala, which is kind of looks like a deer, and it gets overcome by a jaguar, some other animal in the wild, and it gets it by the neck. And what you see happen, the natural instinct is that the animal goes into a freeze state. And it looks like it's dead, and the reason for it is to preserve itself. It's not consciously doing that. It just naturally does that, where it looks like it's dead, and it's a freeze state. And it's also all kinds of chemicals are going into its body to numb itself, to prepare for the pain that could happen, right? So all of these chemicals come into the body to numb it. And then what ends up happening is another animal comes and distracts the jaguar, whatever that animal is, and it leaves it. And so what you end up seeing is this animal actually thaw. So what happens is it starts to vibrate, goes into this spastic vibration, and then after it finishes, you see it take a few deep breaths, and then it jumps up and it runs off like nothing happened, because that's what happens in the wild, without the mind or being civilized. That's what happens, is that you go through that natural process of fight, flight, freeze, discharge. So
we're missing the discharge.
We're missing the discharge, and partly we're missing the discharge because we have a higher brain that allows us to think our way out of things. And so we bypass and we move on with life, and we can be quite successful. We can get back to work, but are held within us is all of this frozen trauma, grief, all this unprocessed stuff that has to be discharged for us to really kind of come into a healthy space, which is, what I talked about last time about that emotionally flexible space.
So when a person is experiencing grief, not grief from something that happened 20 years ago, but something that's new to the system, mm-hmm. How can they use what you shared last week to integrate?
Part of it is, I think, understanding the mechanism, like I just described. I think it's important to understand the mechanism of stress, to understand the spiritual mechanism. If we understand how that works, we can be present with ourselves when we're going through it. And when you're with someone who's going through it, to allow them to be exactly where they're at and support them through that so that they can begin to allow it to move. It requires a certain stillness and time to work through that, what I just described to you, to be able to start to move the emotions because they want to move. That's what emotions want to move. Emotions, energy and motion. Everything's energy, and so it wants to move. But we have to be patient with when. Everybody grieves differently. Everybody comes in a little bit different with a different emotional makeup, with a different sign, a different way of processing. And so we sometimes think, and that's why it can be difficult for people when everyone comes running to you when you're grieving, and then they kind of move on, and now you're actually feeling your emotions. Mm. That happened to me when my mother passed away, is that it was 9 months after she died. I had all the support that I felt it. And I had a lot of anxiety I had to work with because I had been able to kind of put the grief off to the side. And then I really started, and that's when people are moving on. And so really, when you...
By the way, you weren't a child. I just want to make it clear.
No,
for
I was
listening.
an adult.
You were an adult. I think I met you not long after that, no?
Yeah. It was probably 20 years ago now at this point, but maybe not. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I was an adult. And it got me. It got me. So, what I would say is that we have to stop and pay attention to it and pay attention to ourselves and have grace with ourselves and find somebody who is a compassionate, non-judgmental witness. It doesn't always have to be a therapist. It could be a friend to help you move it. I have been that for people where, as a friend, I've just let them talk. We walk because you want to move the body. You want to do everything you can to help move it. And, if it's a new trauma, you kind of have to let that settle and let that, some of the traumas you're seeing now, you're seeing, oh, they're not even close to in their body. They're not even, and they need to be there because they need to be numb for a minute. It's like bubble wrap over the body, to let them be able to even begin to process it because it's too overwhelming. But when they're ready, so if someone doesn't call you back, if they seem angry, these are all phases of grief, and grief has phases, and they're there for a reason. So at first it's denial. What's that about? That's the bubble wrap. That's the thing to allow you to begin to be able to take in what just happened. And depending how traumatic it is or how ready you are for it is, like for my mother's, I wasn't quite ready. For my dad's, very ready, easy to go through all of them, But for my mom, it was a little more complicated. And sometimes it's multiple or mass, So just to be with somebody who can bear witness to whatever those phases are you're going through. I have a friend who lost a son a few years ago, and she gets angry. She's just like angry at everybody. And she's this friend she's cutting out and this friend. And we go for a walk and we know what it is. It's the grief. And she needs to cry. She needs to talk. She needs to rant. She needs to talk about that friend, whatever. But she just has to go through the anger, because the anger is sort of like, I reject it. I reject what happened. It's not okay. And when that's allowed, then you can get into the other ones where you can get it. Then there's the bargaining. If only, what if, whatever, And one thing I do with my clients is when they're ready, I have them change it to even if I had left the house at that time, they still would have. Even if, instead of what if, because the what if is the not accepting of what's happening. And then there's often depression that comes with it. And sometimes people will just disconnect from you. They'll ghost. Most people don't want to be seen at that point. And that's when you really have to reach out and make sure that but also don't blame them for it, but just sit with them and let them experience whatever it is. It's sadness and it's fair. And tears cleanse the soul. So the more crying, the more expressing, you want that. And especially for me, I always guide them into the body because then I can move that. And then the acceptance. And it's not that they accept what is that they can let go of the resentment about it or the anger. My friend's never going to accept that she lost her son, ever. That's not acceptable. But she can change her relationship with him. She can appreciate more the relationship she has with her other sons. She's getting closer to them, the friendships that have come out of it. And then the last would be finding meaning. And for me, I look for examples of people who can do that, even in the worst circumstances. Viktor Frankl, look at you. You are the sweetest thing. She's all choked up.
Okay.
Feel it. I'm in. I'm all in. I'm all about that. In Man's Search for Meaning, this is a Holocaust. He was in the Holocaust and the worst circumstances. And he would help people look out on the trains at the sunsets, the beauty. He would remember the love of his wife and feel his heart. Tell me what's happening with you. Please.
Thank you. My 12-year-old son, one of his good friends, lost his mom. Suddenly. I don't even know why I'm bringing this up. Maybe we should edit it out.
Please don't. Please don't.
And, you know, let's say his 4 or 5 closest friends, his little boyfriend group, she passed away suddenly. I think it was in September. A young woman in her 50s. And it was traumatic for, I mean, even we weren't close. I wasn't close, but my son is close with his friend. But even my girls had a strong reaction to hearing about it, or to knowing that it could happen. I think was the big shock. And he came back to school after a week. And my son said, he's normal. Why is he normal? Like, and I'm thinking about, I'm listening to you and thinking about what's going on in him. And I don't know. And one of the things that we talked about was also, so not silly, but we know a lot of kids that lost their dad at 12, or their parents at 12, I should say, not just at dad, moms too. And why is that? And we just got into this whole conversation. And I think that what you're sharing is so powerful, because if these, you know, I want to send the episode to his friend or his friend's dad to hear the reality of what's happening. And my job here is to present the spiritual, you know, I know the rules of the game of life. I know what's happening with the soul. That doesn't negate the pain.
No.
And I've also had the opportunity over all these years to be with students who are in loss, are grieving fresh loss. And all the knowledge and the wisdom and the tools in the world don't diminish the pain. Mm-hmm. And so I feel like the same conversation that in a way I'm laughing because it's sort of funny. The same conversation we had last week about healing trauma, the grief and the sadness and the pain, they also serve a purpose. And most of the world is numbing, ignoring, putting it in a container for a time when it's acceptable or allowed, or I guess it's, you know, not always appropriate to burst into tears at work or at the supermarket or wherever else people are. But holding that energy in, I mean, I'm thinking I have tears in my eyes because I'm thinking about this little boy who I don't know if he knows what to do with it when he feels it. And it's just so, it's painful for me to think about the pain that he must feel, because it's not fair and it's not acceptable. And
yeah. And that's part of it.
That's a part of it.
Yeah. And to let people be wherever they are and to help them be able to be there safely. That's what moves it. It's the acceptance of what is that helps things move, and people can soften and move. So he needs somebody to be able to just be with him wherever he's at. And, you know, sometimes school is just the normal, some
For
normalcy,
sure.
like something I can get out of my head.
100%.
Yeah.
And they even coached the class on how to not be different with him and to really be familiar and the same, so that he has that safety from them, that he has a big change in his life. He doesn't need everybody to change.
Right.
And I thought that, you know, normally we say, you know, I'm so sorry for your loss. And they said, don't say that. Don't say it to him. Don't even say it to his family. Like, it was a whole, I don't know, very different way of looking at loss than I had experienced before. because I'd never been around, thank goodness, needing to guide young people on how to handle it.
Yeah. It's an interesting dance, of being present. I always think it's good to say their name, not dance, like not avoid it, but not say, how are you? Don't do that either. Just kind of be there, be present. Sometimes it's a good time to put your arm around or just sit with and just try to create the environment for something to change. And it might just be taking a walk, take a drive, go do something where then there's some kind of movement. I was just flashing to this. I was walking to my Pilates class, and there's a little boy and little girl were walking, and they're so cute, and they're just talking. She's like she's got like her pajamas on, and she's just so sweet, and her hair's a little messy, and they're just walking their dog or something. And I'm talking to her, and she goes, "Yeah, my mom died." And the boy goes like that, and she just starts talking about her mom. And I just walked her to me with Pilates, listening to her talk about her mom. And it was just a moment of a grief burst that she felt compelled to talk. I was not going to stop that. Yeah. Then you have to be because that's how grief is. It comes in bursts. You can't predict it. And there's storms, and they just come, and you think you're fine, and then all of a sudden you're in tears or a puddle. You have to leave, and you just it's all part of it. And it's normal because it's a normal response to an abnormal situation. So everything goes. But if you are a person helping that person, your job is to just be able to stand there. Don't hide from people. Don't assume that they're being taken care of because it's uncomfortable for you. I say err on the side of showing up, and they'll tell you no, but err on the side of showing up and doing something that might be wrong even. It doesn't have to be perfect. It can be wrong. You might be someone they get angry at. It's okay. You may be building resentment because they're ghosting you. And you're like, well, and it's really just because they're trying to just get through a moment. And then they have to do other things like deal with all the affairs. They have to function. And then they have to also deal with their whole life changing, everything being different.
Well, there's two things I flashed on while you were talking. One is, and this is not a paid promotion, I finished watching Ted Lasso recently. Oh. And I'm not going to give any plot away because I know not everybody's seen it, but you should see it. Yeah. So at a certain point, his mom comes to visit, and, he's noticing that she's here for a reason, but she's not saying why she's here. So finally he confronts her in such an awesome way. And he brings in the fact that she didn't, when his dad passed away when he was a kid, she pretended like everything was okay. Yeah. And didn't talk about it and just kind of moved right along. And it reminded me, and I couldn't remember when we talked about it initially, but now I remember, of course, in one of Brene Brown's books, she talked about how when her parents divorced and her mom went on this great, journey with therapy and getting herself together, she didn't realize it then, but now where she's at, that they experienced a loss that they never grieved, which was the loss of their family unit. Mm. And going back to what you said, a lot of families dissolved in the last few years. A lot of companies, businesses, financial institutions, there's been a lot of loss it is not only loss of life, it's loss of relationship with things, loss of connection, loss of, I'm going to use the word institution, include family in that, because it's a structure or a organization that we are used to that suddenly isn't there anymore. And there is this understanding, or this theory, I guess it is, that when the family ceases to exist as a unit, the positive memories often are forgotten. Yeah. But also there is a certain forbiddenness about fondly remembering what was. Mm-hmm. That even the kids whose parents divorce feel badly, they start to assign negative feelings to things that were once positive. Yeah. Memories and experience, remembering the holidays when everyone's together, you can't You can't enjoy that memory. And I think it is the whole conversation about loss and grief is really a conversation about change.
It is.
That we rely on what's familiar and what's comfortable and what's predictable. And when we lose something, whether it's a person or a relationship or a status or whatever it is, it requires radical change. It creates radical change, and our response to it requires radical change. Yeah. And I think that's where the spiritual part comes in. I would say from all of the reasons people seek spirituality, loss of a loved one is in the top 2.
Yes.
Loss shakes us. It breaks us. What's interesting is I think people feel like, I've had students call me and say, all these people are dying around them. What are they doing wrong? As though other people's health issues or
magical thinking,
right, the opposite way, you know, that people. Anyway, point being, there is a divine purpose behind it all, right? Just this week, I was in a class. So funny, teaching a class, and one of the students volunteered to share her story. We were talking about, and this is actually so appropriate, I can't even get over it, about embracing the process, not avoiding, not running away, being able to, having the ability to sit through difficult emotions, uncomfortable situations, and the unknown. And this woman volunteered to talk, and she had explained that without much detail at all, she explained that she was abused when she was younger and has PTSD as a result. And it's very hard for her. She gets scared, panic attacks, even though intellectually she understands there's no danger. Her body just snaps into a mode and she can't get ahead of it.
Yeah.
And the meditation, and she is seeking professional help. She has done so much work on herself. She works with kids with disabilities, just such a phenomenal story in the physical reality. But what the work that we did together in the class, and it wasn't just for her, it was for everyone, is to be able to say that even in that moment that feels so dark and so constricted, right? That there's all of the possibilities have been eliminated. There is only one experience right now, that the light of the Creator is there in that moment. And I feel like the experience of pain automatically gets assigned the label of bad. And that, you know, that there's a part of us, even my kids, they can say, her soul finished what, talking about the friend's mom, her soul finished what she needed to do. She must have been so elevated. Like, there was such beautiful things said about her. It's just hysterical in a bad way, in a good way too. But the idea was that we have that like upper brain that says it's all for the best. She's in a better place. She's watching over us now. In order to avoid the bad part, which is the sadness and the loss. Yeah. And I feel like if anything, the shift to be made is pain isn't bad.
Right.
Grief isn't
it's
bad.
Like a birth
Sadness
canal.
Isn't bad.
It's like a birth canal. It's like a reverse birth canal in a way, right? But you have to go through that. And then the meaning emerges. Or you can say the meaning and then you can live into it for real by going through. But either way, you have to address it and you have to go through the pain. And then amazing things come from it. It really does. And I think that's what the people are avoiding, but they're missing out on something amazing because they're so attached to these bodies. But that greater meaning is what we naturally come into, and life purpose, all kinds of amazing stuff comes from that.
While you were talking, I was remembering we just were speaking about this. It's so funny how everything is connected, but my kid's school was raising money for an organization in LA that was created as a result of this story. And the story was that this woman who was married and had trouble conceiving, like after like 7 years, pregnant with twins, finds out her husband has a terminal heart issue. Mm-hmm. He spent like a year and a half. She gave birth. He spent a year and a half in hospital and died. She had 2 newborn babies, needed to be going to the hospital all the time and everything. And eventually he passed away. She was widowed with 2 kids. She met somebody else. They got married. Now they have a family. And she created an organization that takes care of the families who have a loved one in the hospital for extended periods of time so that they have a home. She provides them like with a home, that they don't need to be in a hotel. They don't need to be sleeping at the hospital, that they can have some semblance of warmth and love and someone taking care of them, because she herself had struggled so much being a new mom, not having a partner, needing to nurse the partner, nurse the children. And what was funny is I was sharing the story and their neighbors are at the table with, like, they knew
right.
them
Wow.
personally. It was just a funny,
Wow.
very funny thing. But the point is, as many people as I've seen cleave to spirituality as a result of loss, I've seen as many people, if not more, because it happens outside of spiritual circles, people respond to the calling to do something for others as a result of their loss. And not just a scholarship fund in their name, but literally, like you said, a life's purpose.
Yeah.
That they shift their gears so dramatically for the sake of making the world a better place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I hate to say this, but I love working with grief because it has
I think it's important that it's said.
so many, there's so much in it. It's so rich and people are always grieving something.
Well, but that was my point about the loss, losing the relational connection. We were still a family.
Yeah.
We're still related the same way we were before, but the 5 of us are not a package anymore.
Yeah.
And that creates
is
loss.
100%.
And we don't acknowledge, maybe 2 people who are divorcing mourn the loss of the marriage, but the loss of the family structure, the rituals, the celebrations, the same. It's so, I never thought about it.
Yeah.
And it was so profound to think that we're all walking around holding this untouched grief.
Yeah.
And how unhealthy that is.
It's so unhealthy. And you're missing out on what's on the other side of it, which
That's
is
important.
Which is often gratitude. Like when I hear someone who had this very complicated relationship with a parent and they spend a lot of time working on that, grieving, raging, trauma, blah, blah, blah. They just keep going. And then I hear them say, I kind of remember when she really, I was really sick and she came and and then all of a sudden they're having memories of the good stuff. And it becomes a richer picture, a more rounded picture. It's not one way. That's why you say the divorce story. If you really work with that and process that, what will come out of it is the memories that were good at the end. Not right away. They have to that's why you have to have a parent who's willing. The parent they feel safer with is generally the parent that gets attacked, in life,
I've noticed that.
Yeah. And
I embrace that.
Yes. You have to embrace it. You have to embrace it because it's a compliment to you that you're the safe parent and it's them processing it. And again, they need that safe place to be able to express. And maybe there should be a therapist or whatever, but you also just take it for what it is, which is this child is grieving what is, and they need a place to put it. And I'm going to help them go through that birth canal, so that something else can come on the other end. And it usually is something where they have some gratitude for the other side.
That's important because I think it's human nature to assign painful things the label of bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember asking my kids not long after we were divorced, how did they feel about it? Which, I don't know, maybe was not the smartest question to ask,
it's fine.
9, 11, and 13-year-old, whatever. I asked them and they actually said that they're glad that we did because they really loved, and they still love, my ex's girlfriend at the time, who's now his ex also, but she really became a part of our family, like an aunt, and still is to this day. She's married and has her own family, but they still have, I'm connected to her as well. And she wouldn't be, they said, if not for your divorce, she wouldn't be in our family.
Wow.
And, there was definitely pain along the way, but the outcome is good.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody would change what happened now.
And then, you can get to that spiritual understanding of, we were meant to have you 3 kids. Your souls
that was the
were
first
meant.
one.
Yeah.
That was the easy one as spiritual people is to say, if not for our being together, these people, who they are, wholly would not have come into manifestation. So that was the easiest one.
Yeah.
I think afterwards it becomes, can we also bless the scars that came from it?
Beautiful.
And that I do, because now is who I am, what I've learned and how I've grown since. I realized that I couldn't have grown without those moments. And of course, there's always the sliding doors. There's also a reality where we didn't come together, but now I see so perfectly. And it's funny because in this class that I was telling you about before, with telling all 10,000 of you before about it feels like Karen and I are having coffee right now.
Totally.
That the other teacher that was teaching with me had also been divorced. And he said it was one of the most painful things, but he now sees it as the greatest blessing that's ever happened to him. And acknowledging it as a blessing is saying both the marriage and the divorce. It's not getting out of the marriage that was the blessing. It's the marriage then existing and ending was the blessing.
Yes.
And I feel like the same, if you're strong, when you get to that stronger place, you can say that about the person that you lost as well.
Yes.
Because what was is blessed, and also their departure is a blessing.
Yeah.
We don't always get to see the full expression of the blessing, but yeah.
My mother was the example of courage. That was my goal, to be that brave through everything that she had been through in her life. And it continues to be. And she passed at 69 and I'm now 63. So I'm going to circle this again. Grief is a circle. It goes like this. So here's the pain of it. And then you keep working it. You go through all the phases, you express, you cry, you share, you move, you do whatever. And what happens is it's always there, but there's space between you and the pain. And it just widens until some of that will fold out completely. But for me, I'm going to have to deal, as I'm moving towards 69, that again. I know it. I'm aware of it. And so I'm going to have to circle that grief again. Even though it feels almost gone, I have only gratitude and wonderful things right now. That's how much work I've done. It takes a lot of work to get there. But there's going to be more to come. Because it's always kind of there. And sometimes it's not quite ready.
And maybe that's also why people struggle with it, is because they're waiting for it to end.
Never going to end. And that's okay, because it's this beautiful mosaic that blew you apart and comes back together, and you're different.
But I also think that that's a metaphor for a lot of why people embrace a spiritual practice, is they hope it's going to give them relief.
Not looking for relief.
Yeah, don't look for relief.
No.
Not from
You're
anything.
looking for transformation.
Yeah.
And a side effect is that you feel better. That's not, the goal is to kind of keep pushing into it, the pain. Okay, well, we can keep talking over coffee.
We can have a private session now. I always feel like when we have guests on the Weekly Energy Boost, it's really a private session for me. So listening to my private session with Karen today.
Beautiful.
And thank you, Karen, for being so generous with your time and your heart and your wisdom. I'm sure we're going to get lots of we want mores. Oh. Wow. As a result of today.
This was fun.
But again, I think also having this conversation now means something else than it did in 2020, and also is important in a different way. And so I'm really glad that we were able to do this. And I apologize that I cried on the air.
Oh, no, don't apologize. No apologizing.
Episode ever, just because
from the heart.
I got choked up.
You're helping other people when you do
sure.
that.
And I really do hope that, I know that it will help more than one person, but every episode to me is like, even if it helps one person, it was worth it all. So Weekly Energy Boost is available on all podcast platforms, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. We have a website, weeklyenergyboost.com, where you can find out more about all the things that we think are good for our listeners to know about, as well as click the donate button and help to make Weekly Energy Boost possible. Please continue to rate, review, like, and share. If you have any questions, you can fill out the form at weeklyenergyboost.com or send us an email at energyboost@kabbalah.com. And we'll see you next week on the Weekly Energy Boost.